creates questions the human mind cannot answer. Out of reach, past all we can see, hear, and touch, beyond all we understand, lies the extraordinary. The extraordinary is the dream that haunted the life of this woman for 10 years. A dream of bodies under the house.
All I ever see is the bodies there, and they're all women, and I don't know how they got there, and I know they're there, and I know I haven't done it, but it's like I know that they're there, and I want to tell someone.
Karen Christie could see the grotesque shapes of the dead. When the infamous House of Horrors was uncovered in Britain in 1994, the dream exploded into reality. Karen Christie had visited the house and slept in its rooms. It is the world of mystery Lloyd Bridges discovered during his years in the TV series Sea Hunt, where he witnessed women giving birth underwater and watched the miraculous behavior of dolphins.
Actually saw women being given birth underwater with the help of dolphins. The dolphin would bring the baby up after it was given birth to.
The extraordinary is waking in an unfamiliar room, cold and disorientated.
Someone had made such a terrible mistake that they should have been a bit more careful.
You are in a morgue. The world thinks you are dead.
Can you get me a blanket?
It is the freak happening that reunited this Doberman with her master. There was no logic behind what happened.
I was absolutely amazed, but so happy to have her back.
The extraordinary is the most remarkable war survival story of all time. In one day, Keith Schilling cheated death so many times, he lost count.
It was a long, long day. A long day.
The man they couldn't kill. Just some of the stories that lie beyond our normal understanding. Tonight on The Extraordinary.
If ever a man deserved to be called lucky, it's Keith Schilling. More on that later. Good evening. I'm Warwick Moss. The concise Oxford Dictionary describes a dream as a state of mind without proper perception of reality, or a series of pictures or events in the mind of a sleeping person. What the dictionary doesn't tell us is what those dreams mean, or why we have them. For some people, dreams never reveal their meaning. For others, it takes days, weeks, or years for the reason to become clear. Take the case of Karen Christie. One recurring dream lasted 10 years and had its roots in one of the greatest crimes of the 20th century.
All I ever see is the bodies there, and they're all women, and I don't know how they got there, and I know they're there, and I know I haven't done it, but it's like I know that they're there, and I want to tell someone, but I can't tell anyone.
Karen Christie first had that dream almost 10 years ago. At the time, she was happily married with a new baby, living in the suburbs of Sydney. There were no pressures, nothing, it seemed, that could possibly prompt the dreadful images of death that invaded her dreams.
It's not like a visual thing. It wasn't a visual dream where I saw horrible, horrible things. It was a feeling. It was just a horrible, and I can't explain how the feeling it was. It was just horrible feeling. Sick, you felt sick.
Karen's first recollection of the dream was one night while she and her husband Del were renovating their home.
I remember my husband was digging the trenches, and he said to me, "I'll come under the house and have a look." And I said, "Oh, I don't want to go under there. I really can't." And he said, "Why?" And I said, "Oh, well, I had a dream last night, and it was I dreamt that were bodies buried underneath this house. And he just said, oh, don't be stupid, and just laughed at me.
Trenches, the sound of digging, the visions of yawning graves. Karen was mystified, horrified, and sickened. Her husband was simply perplexed.
I suppose in that particular area I was digging an area that was about 6 foot deep, going down to rock, and there was a small balcony at the back of the place, and Karen came out onto that and expressed the fact that she had this dream last night that there was either bodies or she'd been buried herself in there.
There seemed to be no sane reason why Karen was afraid to go near the digging. Why? Why in the safe suburbs of Sydney? Even now, 10 years later, when she talks about the dreams and her fears, it sounds as though that terror, that horror, is still there, still present.
I have that in my mind all the time. Every time I go into that house, I think about that. I think, oh, that's right, I hope there isn't anyone buried under there. And it's just in the back of your mind all the time, so the dreams, they're just very intense.
It seems like the trenches would have been a trigger towards maybe even just the sound.
But the trigger to what? The dreams would continue. That question would remain unanswered until early in 1994. Karen Christie's horror was the House of Horrors, number 25 Cromwell Street, Gloucester, scene of the most macabre murder mystery in Britain's history. That's where the bodies of 9 women have been unearthed, where the landlord, Frederick West, and his wife, Rosemary, have been charged with unspeakable crimes, and where Karen Christie spent much of her free time as a teenager, while she was on a working holiday in Britain during the late 1970s. Number 25 Cromwell Street, Karen's second home, the trigger for those dreadful dreams, which began a decade before the first gruesome remains were unearthed in Gloucester.
It's too coincidental to have those dreams for that period of time, and then all of a sudden you find that you lived in a house, and at the time I lived in that house 17 years ago, there were 7 bodies already underneath the floorboards.
At the time, Karen was actually living with an aunt a few doors down the street from number 25. But she spent most of her free time with her closest friend, a girl called Elizabeth, who rented the attic in the boarding house that was to become known as the House of Horrors. Really, there was no way Karen Christie could have known what was going on in Cromwell Street. The house then, as now, was colourless, ordinary, and very, very suburban.
Just a normal semi-detached house, basically normal house. And the people, it was a very busy house because there were boarders there all the time. It was very busy, like people coming and people going. And I actually liked going there because I was very lonely. I missed my family.
Today, looking back over all those years, Karen does remember some happy times in England. Her job in a bar where she worked with Elizabeth, the parties, the laughs. But there are other memories, fleeting ones, of number 25 and the owners, Frederick and Rosemary West. Memories, feelings that something was not quite right in that semi in Cromwell Street.
The house did sort of smell. The downstairs smelled. And it wasn't a food smell, and it wasn't a smell you could really relate to anything. It was just a smell, and I smelt it, and I don't know if anybody else did, but I did.
For 10 years, long after she'd returned from England and settled down in Australia, Karen Christie dreamt about bodies buried beneath a house. There was that sick feeling, and there were the nagging questions. Was it her house? Her body? The dream was to haunt her until Gloucester police began digging in the garden at number 25 Cromwell Street, and the first bodies were discovered.
So I had the police ringing me, asking me, did I know, and they said a name, and they'd asked me how tall she was and did she have a child and how big her bones were. So it was very upsetting, you know, friends you hadn't seen for 17 years, and all of a sudden you have to try and remember how tall they were and how old they were and how many kids they had, and it's really hard.
At first, Karen feared her old friend Elizabeth might be among the victims. Over the years, they drifted apart, lost contact. But Elizabeth was eventually tracked down. She was safe, well, and happily married. Then came the news that another of Karen's friends, a young girl named Shirley, was one of those confirmed dead.
When I said goodbye to her, I can still remember. I can still see her face and that feeling she gave. It was just a really haunting sadness that came off her. And I sort of wonder now if it was some sort of premonition or something. Because I know she was murdered soon after that. But she was very, very sad. Very sad.
But as the horrible truth emerged from Cromwell Street, as the death toll mounted, Karen's dreams suddenly ceased.
I have been waiting to have these dreams again, and I just haven't had them. And I'm quite happy about that, actually.
For Karen Christie, it's been a harrowing 10 years. Dreams she didn't understand. Dreams that terrified her. But even more horrific was the reality and the realization that she'd spent so much time at number 25 Cromwell Street. That she had lived with the horror and could so easily have been one of the victims.
My personal opinion is that we were spared because I had an auntie in the same street, and Elizabeth had her family in the same area, and if we disappeared, there would be questions asked. But I think most of the girls that disappeared didn't have any family.
Hollywood these days is the Bridges clan. Son Jeff is a superstar. His brother Beau is a critically acclaimed actor and director. And then there's the old man, Lloyd, Mr. C. Hunt himself, one of the real nice men in Hollywood.
He looks upon himself as a grandfather, someone who can pass along to the generation beyond his sons and daughter the same thing that made them a family of doers. Lloyd Bridges, longtime Hollywood survivor, is a man who knows that good times come from hard work and the right priorities. For Bridges, the first one is family.
We feel so fortunate that we do all love one another in our family. There's not only my two boys, Beau and Jeff, but I have a daughter, Lucinda. And the gal who's really responsible for it all is my wife, Dorothy. We call her the General. She calls all the shots. And any excuse that we can get together, any birthdays, and there are a lot of them. We got a dozen grandchildren now. It's just it's a joy to be with my grandchildren and my kids, of course.
The living evidence of his course in this life is the immense success that's come to his sons, Jeff and Beau Bridges, the happiness of his daughter, Lucinda, and the wonderful partnership with his wife, Dorothy. They are his closest. Lloyd Bridges doesn't reserve his affection for his kids and the kids of the world. There's another special group that he found when his career took him into the sea.
Having done sea hunt, I was brought closer to what actually transpires under the water there. The thoughtless things that people have done. I suppose that awakened me to the fact that the ocean needs our attention, because we get our oxygen from the ocean too. The air we breathe. Those terrible drift nets that they put out, they go out for miles, and they catch anything. Everything else that's in there, like the little whales and the dolphins, are all just maimed. I had a little experience with them when I was doing sea. I was working in the Marine Land tank. I used to kid around with them with my tank on and ride them, and they were just like well, dogs, you know. You get on them and they would play with me. I felt something between them, a good kind of nice relationship, warm relationship. I met a lady when I was in Maui, and she had lived the last several years of her life almost with dolphins, and actually saw women being given birth underwater with the help of dolphins. The dolphin would bring the baby up after it was given birth to. And she, this particular lady, was given up for good because they thought that she was going to die from cancer. I think a uterine cancer or something she had. And so somehow she got turned on to the fact that if she swam with the dolphins and was a part of the dolphins, she would get something from them. And you don't know how true something like this is, not, but she's cured now. She's completely healthy.
It was that kind of experience that Lloyd says opened his mind to some of the other unexplained happenings of this world.
My wife and I, at one period in our lives, were very interested in automatic writing, you know, where you hold a pencil and you try to get answers. She holds it one side and you hold the other. And I always suspect my wife of moving it, but you gotta have faith in one another. And it's almost like your hands are empowered. And I still don't know whether it's from some other source or power, or whether it's your hands get tired holding it and they get a lot, I don't know. But we had some amazing experiences. One time we got a musician, somebody must have been quite famous. At least he led us to believe he was. But it was clear. He came in very, very clear. We were down at the beach then, and we said, well, write us a melody, one of your melodies. So he did put the 5 lines and the staff and everything and the notes he put in very fast. He worked very fast, and we played the melody afterwards, and it was lovely.
On other occasions, Lloyd thinks he delved too closely into the unexplained. It was to do with a message he got from his late grandmother.
We talked, and I told her how much I missed her and all that, you know, everything. And I don't think I asked her. I think she brought it up in our conversation. She said, you're having trouble with your plumbing. I'll tell you where it is. There was a tree there once, and the roots were getting into this pipe, and it stopped it up so that the water couldn't get through. And I got a plumber out, and he looked at it, and that was it. And I can't explain it.
It was not the only time Lloyd thinks he tapped into something he still can't explain.
If my work is any good as an actor, then a lot of it has been help that I've received from my past actor friends. You know, something like that, though, you don't know whether it's your own imagination or what it is. It's certainly something that I think about often, as we all do, I'm sure. We're all interested to know what the heck's going to happen after we take our last breath. Well, I can tell you what I'd like to believe. I'd like to believe that just like they say it is, there's a beautiful heaven there. I mean, I would love to believe that.
Imagine waking one day in a cold, unfamiliar room. You are naked, a sheet covering you from head to foot, and you are lying on a slab. You are, in fact, dead. At least as far as the rest of the world is concerned. But as far as you know, you are very much alive.
A teenage girl.
The doctors apparently had given up, pronounced her dead, and consigned her body to the hospital morgue. But not only was she very much alive, this road accident victim had returned from a celestial journey with a clear direction for the long and fruitful life that stretched before her.
Oh God, wake up! Denise, listen to me!
The accident happened on an evening in November 1965, near Auckland in New Zealand. Two young girls had been driving back from a weekend visit to relatives in the country. Their car skidded in gravel, rolled several times, then plummeted over a steep embankment. Miraculously, the driver wasn't injured, but the passenger, 17-year-old Denise, was not nearly so fortunate.
I had spinal injuries and I had several knocks about the head. As the car rolled, my head kept banging. And additionally, I put my foot through the front window, so I lost one toe and severed another.
By the time Denise reached hospital, she was floating in and out of consciousness. She remembers that medical staff were preparing to operate, but at this stage, she had not been given any anaesthetics.
I was on the operating table and there was a young doctor, perhaps in his early 20s. He was a registrar, and a nurse who was about my own age. She was still in training. And the two of them were flirting at the time because they obviously didn't think that I was aware of what was going on. And about this time, my body seemed to, or my spirit or something, seemed to leave my body. And I was up in the ceiling in the corner, looking down over them, operating on my foot. And I was quite distressed at the time because I was feeling that I should tell them I should have an anaesthetic because I'd had no medication to deaden the pain. And here they were going to operate, so I was very anxious about this. I seemed to lose interest in what was going on, and I felt myself falling into a big sort of tunnel or a big hole, and I thought of Alice in Wonderland as she tipped over and over into this blackness.
Because of her professional position, Denise would only tell her story if she could remain anonymous. In fact, until now, very few people have heard this story. One is researcher Dr. Sherry Sutherland, who has interviewed hundreds of people who are convinced they've had near-death experiences.
Some people call it a tunnel, others describe it in other ways. You know, for example, somebody said it was like a dark valley. Some people say it's like a limitless black velvet space. And they almost always talk about a light.
A long, long, dark tunnel. And I became aware of this very, very bright white light at the end of it. But it wasn't bright in a painful sense, but just a glowing and a feeling of peace and serenity entered me. And it just seemed so wonderful. It was a wonderful experience to be close to this light.
And at the very centre of the light, Denise felt a presence, a supreme being, who communicated with her.
And the communication was a thought transference, sort of an instantaneous speech without words. And he said to me, "Stop, you cannot go on. You have a life of service yet." When I came back to my body, there was no sensation of actually getting into my body, just a waking up with a feeling of loss that I'd missed out on something that was really important.
When Denise actually regained consciousness, she believes she was no longer in the operating theatre. She was naked, covered only by a sheet, on a stainless steel trolley. She was, to hospital authorities, clinically dead, lying in the hospital morgue, awaiting official identification by her aunt. In reality, Denise was very much alive, very bewildered, and very cold. A point she made to her shocked aunt.
Can you get me a blanket? I'm really cold, please.
She didn't seem very pleased at all. She was angry that someone had told her that I was dead, and she was angry that someone had made such a terrible mistake, that they should have been a bit more careful.
To this day, Denise has no idea how close to death she really was, or for that matter, how she came to be on that trolley in the morgue.
When I talked to this godlike figure, it seemed like a matter of a minute or even less. And yet when I was back on the earth body, it must have been 30 or 40 minutes, given the time it would have taken my aunt to have driven to the hospital.
When she got back, she thought to herself, well, what on earth is a lifetime of service? She didn't have, as a teenager, she just simply didn't have a concept of what a lifetime of service was.
But since that time, I've found that I have been working in a number of human service type positions as a volunteer with crisis counselling in hospitals, with children, with prisoners. So I have very much been involved in a helping type role.
As for the scene Denise witnessed in the operating theatre, the young doctor and nurse flirting as they prepared for her operation, it also had a sequel.
Later on, I was back in the ward, and it must have been the following day, and the young doctor came to see me that had done the operation on my foot. And I spoke to him about the fact that he was flirting with this nurse. And he went white in the face and was absolutely shocked and was frightened in a sense, and he ran out of the room and never spoke with me again. He didn't ask any questions as to how I would have known of this. He just left.
A car accident that took a teenage girl to the very brink of death. So close, in fact, that doctors thought it was the end. For Denise, though, it was actually the beginning, an experience that has enriched her life.
Death, when I think about it, has got no fear. It's not that one looks forward to it, just that one knows there's no pain, and that it's simply opening a door into another room, so to speak. And in some ways I look forward to it without actively pursuing it, because of the beauty, the peace, the harmony that I experienced previously.
We've spoken before about the undeniable sensory skills of animals. They hear things we don't, sense things we never see. When cats get lost, they've been known to travel great distances to get home. Same with dogs and other pets. But there are times when even animals' surprising powers leave them stranded. And then it's up to fate to step in. This is Levi, the Doberman, a dog who owes her life to a near disaster and a few bizarre twists of fate. A dog who also puts a twist on a very old adage. In this case, it was a man who was a dog's best friend. The man was Rick Fairman, a firefighter in the New South Wales city of Wollongong, south of Sydney. Not just any firefighter. Among other awards, Rick's received the Commonwealth Medal for Bravery. He and his wife Rhonda bought Levi when she was a pup. From the first day, she became part of the family, lavished with love and attention.
We've had Levi for 9 years now. We got her as a pup, and she was my baby. And now that I've had children, I know exactly what it's like, and that's how we used to treat her.
But 3 years ago, It looked as though the Fairmans had lost their best friend, Levi. It started the morning Rick Fairman decided to take Levi to work with him. A morning that for the first time in his career, he was on duty out of town as a relief fire officer at Port Kembla, about 20 kilometres down the road from Wollongong.
I asked the fellas at work if they'd mind if I brought her to work for the day. They're all dog owners, so they said, yeah, no problem at all. So she was packed off to work with me for the day.
Levi had never been to Port Kembla before, and Rick assured me that she'd be all right. He'd tie her up if he had to go to any calls and everything would be fine.
It might have been, but that day there was a fire call and the Port Kembla Brigade sprang into action. Rick and the crew hit the road and left Levi alone at the station.
When we come back, the collar was there, the lead was there, but there was no dog.
For days, the Fairmans and their friends searched Wollongong and Port Kembla. There were appeals on radio, door-to-door inquiries. The result was negative. No clue to the missing Levi's whereabouts.
I never had the feeling that she's gone for good. I always felt like she's meant to be here and, you know, she'll be back here.
After 10 days, the Fairman's confidence was waning. On the 10th night, Rick was back on duty, by chance again, filling in for a sick firefighter at Port Kembla. And as you'll remember, he'd only been stationed there once before in his life, the day Levi disappeared. And, by chance again, there was a fire alarm from a shop in Port Kembla. At the scene, another coincidence. When the fire was under control, the order went out to check the flat behind the charred shop. Of all the firemen there that night, Rick was assigned the task. Outside the flat, he found a man and a woman. They were unhurt, but naturally they were distressed and suffering from smoke inhalation. As Rick helped them to safety, there was an uncanny development.
The man was carrying some belongings, and the lady had a lead, and on the lead was a large male Doberman. I turned to them and said, have you seen a female Doberman wandering around the streets, maybe around here? And I got a big shock when the bloke turned around and said, yeah, we found one the other day.
Rick Fairman's hopes soared. Could it possibly be the missing Levi? Sure enough, as the garage door at the back of the burnt-out shop was opened, there was a Doberman that was very familiar.
As soon as I saw her, I knew it was her, and I just said her name, and the ears sort of started to move, and then I called out again, and she just jumped on me and licking me, and from then on, she just wouldn't do my leg. She was pushed up against my leg everywhere I walked. She wouldn't go anywhere.
After 10 days, Levi was reunited with her master, and soon the couple who rescued her told the story of those missing days. It seems Levi had tried to make it home to Wollongong, and she was on the right track. Halfway there, only a busy multi-lane highway had stopped her. You see, Levi had been trained not to venture onto the road alone.
She had sat there, and the people had seen her, and when they came back she was still there, so they enticed her up to their place with a bowl of milk. She was in a suburb a good 7-8 kilometres away. The chances of that house being on fire that night and me being at the station to respond to that fire it must be phenomenal, the chances.
A lost loved one, trapped in an alien place. A near disaster and a series of lucky breaks that brought Levi home. Even now, years later, the Fairmans cannot believe their good fortune.
I was absolutely amazed, but so happy to have her back. So she got spoiled for quite some time, and I'm happy to say that we still have her.
think you're having a bad day, I suggest you think about the man we're about to meet. His name is Keith Schilling, and if there's ever been a man whose name should be lucky, it's Keith. On April the 5th, 1945, Keith Schilling became the man they couldn't kill.
It was a long, long day. A long day.
The day was April the 5th, 1945. The longest and luckiest day in Keith Schilling's life. He would cheat death not once, not twice, not even 3 times, but more, as you'll see. On the morning of April the 5th, Warrant Officer Schilling was wireless operator on board a Royal Australian Air Force B-24 Liberator, going into action against the Japanese in the Timor Sea off Darwin. There were 9 Liberators in the Australian squadron. Then out of nowhere, the Japanese attacked. Keith Schilling's Liberator took the full force of the Japanese firepower.
And the shells hit a small auxiliary petrol tank under the flight deck about 2 feet from my feet. This, of course, exploded, and a fire of that sort, fanned by the air rushing through the shell holes, was like a blast furnace. It wasn't long before the engineer and myself, having tried the fire extinguishers, that we were told to bail out. And the fire was hot, and of course self-preservation's the first thing that anybody thinks about. I grabbed my parachute and put it on, instead of with a right-hand pull, put it on a left-hand pull, because it clipped on the front of your harness. Said goodbye to my beautiful cap and dived out through the bomb bay. On the way, of course, you were taught only once that you count 10 before you pull the ripcord. Well, I tell you what, my 10 was the fastest 10 on earth. And I counted only 5 parachutes that came out of our aircraft. 2 fell out without chutes. The fire just drove them out before they had time to do anything. And this self-preservation, you know, forced them out, knowing full well that they would die.
With the dogfight raging above, Keith Schilling hit the water. He was in one piece, but his troubles had just begun.
I landed in the water with the chute and unfortunately got tangled in the shroud lines. But like all young airmen of the day who thought that they were the greatest thing that God had put on earth, I carried a Bowie knife in my flying boot, and I used that to untangle my legs.
Keith Schilling was literally all at sea.
All the time that I'd been in the Air Force, and even before as a kid, I had a fear of water. Friends had tried to teach me to swim, and I could float. That was one good thing, but to swim, the answer was nil. But I soon learned that God gave me 2 arms and 2 legs, and what you did with them, and with them was to help me. I paddled around in this rough sea, wondering what I was going to do next. A dinghy had been thrown to me, a little one-man dinghy with a CO2 bottle on it that broke off when it hit the water. So I had a dinghy that was blown up with a hole in it, which I tried to plug with a thumb. And a thumb is not very effective in rough seas. And eventually it went flat.
Keith Schilling, alone, a non-swimmer, fighting to stay afloat. And all the while, the Japanese fighters were strafing the ocean, trying to pick off the survivors. Then, rescue seemed at hand. An Australian Catalina seaplane landed just metres away.
And if I could have walked on water, I would have, but I got up as high as I could and shouted and screamed and waved arms, and you do all the things that anybody would do to direct attention. It zigzagged on the water over several 100 yards, and then, to my great delight, they spotted me, and came alongside, and I was hauled in through the blister. There's a gun blister on the side of it, and taken inside, pretty cold and wet, and told to strip off my clothes and put a blanket on and get into bed.
Safe for the moment, but by no means sound. The Japanese fighters struck again, and their aim was spot on. This time, the rescue Catalina was hit.
And after a few moments of sort of running fire, the petrol tank burst into flames. Now, the petrol tank on a PBY or a Catalina is right above the cabin. And this poured in through the cabin, and I'm standing there, dropped the blanket, and the blazing petrol went down my back. And it was put out by one of the crew and then all thrown back into the water. By this time, I don't have the benefit of a Mae West, I don't have the benefit of clothes, and it was really sink or swim.
Another 2.5 hours at sea. Another dinghy dropped into the ocean from would-be rescuers. And then, another miracle. Another Catalina.
It was an amazing sight. And he taxied towards us, and the story doesn't end there. The wing float landed in the middle of one of our dinghies and cut it in half, so you're all back in the water again. So back in the final dinghy, paddled alongside, and guess who was first off? Yours truly. No clothes, nothing, and I landed on the front, glued myself to the windscreen, and I don't know what the skipper inside thought when he saw this naked apparition glued to his windscreen, and it took quite a bit to get me back inside.
He was a young man who had lied about his age so he could join the Air Force at the age of 17. In one day of war, he went to hell and back. 2 aircraft destroyed under him, hours floundering in a hostile sea, dodging fire from the enemy above. His rescue dinghy sunk and his skin scorched by blazing fuel. But somehow, Keith Schilling survived.
It's one of the puzzles of life, isn't it? That one comes through a day of tragedy for others. And yet I had no fear that I wouldn't return, and I still say, even today, why me?
Susanna York is not superstitious. She's not afraid of black cats or the number 13. But there's a house in Essex that she'll never set foot in again.
I just couldn't go on down this long passage. It was like there was a wall in front of me. And after struggling to go beyond this moment along this wooden passage, I fainted.
A drawbridge, a moat, and the death of a young girl. An untold story. Next time.
Susanna York from London. Next time. Don't forget, if there's a story you'd like us to investigate, write to Post Office Box 462, Newport Beach, Sydney, Australia, 21106. We'd like to hear from you. Now, another upcoming story. It's about a doll. Not an ordinary doll, but one that many believe is possessed. For now, good night. See you in the future.
I could feel this was a person. You could feel the aura of the doll. And I really believe that that doll possesses the aura of the person who created him.